Hello, welcome to the Rugby Chat podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so that we drop into your phone every week and you won't miss an episode. Also, if you'd like to see what happens behind the scenes and watch the show live, you can do it on YouTube. We're live from 8 p.m. every Tuesday in New Zealand time. And obviously the recording will be on YouTube as well. You can also join in the discussion on Twitter. The questions are put out on the @DrivingMaul Twitter handle, and you can put replies in there as well. So whichever way you want to join in, please do. We're up for a good old rugby chat. Joining me this week is my regular team members. I have Mike. How are you doing, sir?
Good, mate. It's good to be back again.
Thank you. And Will from Rugby Numbers. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm half sad and half relieved that the Super Rugby season's over, but looking forward to chatting about it tonight.
Oh, dear, half sad. Well, yes, I guess the relief side is definitely part of there. And joining us from Australia, we have Simon from Gainline Analytics. How are you doing, sir? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's very good. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure joining you all.
So this week, we're going to do something a bit different. Instead of having 5 questions, what we're going to do is we're going to review each of the conferences and give each of the teams a different grade. Now, myself and Mike will be using our expert opinion and putting our finger in the air going, yep, they would deserve X grade from our years of watching rugby. But Will and Simon will be taking different approaches, being analytical people. So, Will, why don't you just give people a quick overview as to how Rugby Numbers works and your analytics from there?
Sure. So simply put, I have a statistical model that looks at the past results. It goes through each match and adjusts the scores to reflect the strength of the teams involved. So scoring a lot of points against a weak team, they'll have their score reduced slightly, and vice versa. And then I run a model that makes predictions on match outcomes based on how teams with similar rankings have performed in the past. And it seems to work pretty well. It's set at about 80% correct this season. And I can also use those same numbers to rank the teams, which I do on a scale of 0 to 100, which I call the Rugby Power Index. And so very strong teams like the Crusaders or the Hurricanes will be up in the 80s, and weak teams like the Sunwolves and the Rebels will be down sort of below 20. So that's just the quick overview of how it works.
Cool. And Simon, our special guest, is joining us from Gainline Analytics. Now, they're an analytical consultancy who get involved in sports and business teams. And he'll be, so how does that all work, please, Simon?
Yeah, so we rank or we assess teams using a different methodology. So we rank teams using recruitment philosophy. So we've got some metrics that we've developed around how teams are recruiting players and around that. So we've developed some metrics, and the main one is what we call TWI, Teamwork Index. So so it's basically a measurement of a team's ability or capacity to perform based on how they recruit. So, and when we say recruit, we're not necessarily using a skill of individual players, but it's more of a measurement of what the collective output of the team will be. So, so what we do, for example, with the Super Rugby season, before the season kicks off, we've got all the squads of the teams, and then we put our measures together and identify where how the teams are going to perform based on how they've recruited in the off season. So so that's what we do across Super Rugby and Rugby League and other sports as well. So
yeah, my understanding of it is that what you're doing is you're putting into numbers what a lot of us intuitively know about when we talk about teams and combinations. So when the Lions came over, for example, a lot of the talk around how Gatland would choose his team was which combinations of players he would choose. So because players who know how to play with each other will be in the right place at the right time, and so they'll play better, and that kind of thing. It's that kind of concept, is if I'm putting it in layman's terms.
It is, and the way you say it, I mean, it does sound like a very much common sense. What we've done is put that common sense into data, and it still does sound like common sense, but 95% of most professional sporting teams still get it wrong. So we are trying to create this common sense version of how to put teams together, but obviously we can back it up with a lot of data.
Yeah, and data that's not influenced by bias and emotion, hopefully.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. And obviously, with when you look at individual players, there's a lot of bias and a lot of emotion that goes along with how players how people think they should be performing on the pitch.
Cool. So I've asked each of the guys to give me a grade from A, B, C, or D for each of the teams, and the idea around this was grading the teams by how compared to how you expected them to perform at the beginning of the season. So that doesn't mean just because someone came top, they would be an A, and someone who would come last would be a D, because that team that came last may have performed much better than expected, even though they did come last. So that's how we've done it. And we're going to jump in with Africa A. Now let me try to share my screen. I've gone and clicked on the wrong one. Screen share, yeah. Anyway, I'll get up in a second. But so Africa A is Stormers, Cheetahs, Bulls, and Sunwolves. And that's the order that they finished the season in. With the and if we go through, I ranked the Stormers a B. Mike gave them a C. Rugby Numbers gave them a B, and Gainline Analytics also gave them a B. Now B, and then if we go up down to the Cheetahs, I gave them a B. Mike gave them a D. Will gave them a B, and Gainline Analytics gave them a C. Now, this is actually the first one I want to touch on, because we all gave the Stormers about what they performed as we pretty much as expected at the top of the conference, making it into the finals. But I'm a bit surprised to see Gainline Analytics give the Cheetahs a C. I know that from my point of view, I expected them probably to come last or at least behind the Bulls. So why do they get a C as opposed to, because you didn't give anyone a D in this is the lowest ranking you gave them. How come they get a C as opposed to a B when we think they sort of performed ahead of how they would normally do?
Yeah, so from our rankings, the way we looked at the teams, the fact that the majority of the teams performed to expectation, that's why our rankings weren't necessarily A through to D. So we fully expected the Cheetahs to probably perform better than they should based on their numbers, based on what we've seen other teams perform with the same metrics. Now, of course, the way we look at it is, obviously, we've got a long-term measure, and that's TWI. So TWI for us, Teamwork Index, is a really good long-term measure of performance. So, for example, 3 years ago, it identified the Lions as a team that was hitting all the right markers. And obviously, the Lions have managed to, the last couple of seasons, come up. And so the Cheetahs for us was a team that was in a similar position what the Lions were about 3 years ago. So that's why we expected them to probably perform better than they did. However, it does come down to what happens in season. If there's a lot of churn in the team in season, then that's going to affect performance. But for us, we expected the Cheetahs probably to perform better than they did. However, that's not saying that they need to suddenly tear up what they're doing, because I think they're in a pretty good trajectory. And if they can hold it together, new season coming up, then they should be able to perform pretty well.
And Mike, because we've diametrically opposite here. I've seen the Cheetahs be a poor team for many years, so I gave them a B because I thought they overperformed. You obviously had some high expectations for them going into the season. What gave you that idea?
Yeah, it was based around, like I said, it was based around the way we looked at the way they put their team together and the way they sourced their players, and essentially the cohesion that they brought into the Cheetahs from their feeder teams. And like I said, it was very similar to what we saw with the Lions 3 years ago. So that's why we're expecting the performance. Now it's quite an inexperienced group, so for the way we've looked at it and the way we've seen teams in a similar situation go, the expectation is that group will quickly come together. They just didn't come together as quickly as what we thought for this season.
Yeah, no, Mike, you gave them a D. So you had a big high expectations as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought the South African teams as a whole would probably do a wee bit better this season than they did. I mean, yes, the Lions made a final and Sharks weren't too bad and neither were the Stormers, but I certainly don't bring into it the science that my two mates here do. But it's really just based on a hunch, and I guess, I looked at the Cheetahs and didn't make the finals, and yeah, did a D.
Yeah, I must say, I mean, the Cheetahs did win the Currie Cup last season, undefeated. They're going well in the Currie Cup as well, and that's where the Lions also built their sort of grounding from. So I can see why we can see them on an upward trajectory.
Mm.
A lot of us, the other one that jumps out clear here are the last two. Obviously, on the analytics point of view, the Bulls and the Sunwolves, by the looks of things from Gainline Analytics, have not had a stable environment, and therefore they're expected to do badly, and they kind of did. For the Bulls, I don't know. For a lot of us, we still think of them as being that team that has won the Super Rugby Championship more than any other South African team, and they should carry that through. And I think that's where my D grade came from. And the Sunwolves, I was hoping to see more of an uplift, because last season, let's be honest, they had 2 weeks preparation time. This season, they had a bit more preparation. Sure, it was a new coach again, but at least they had more time to think about things and plan things. And I thought they would do a bit better than I was hoping they would do a bit better than they actually did. But Rugby Numbers, you seem to think that you've seen a step up from last season, from their performances, or the results at least.
Sorry, we're talking about the Bulls? The Sunwolves, yeah. No, I was going to say the Bulls were dreadful. The Sunwolves, yeah, I mean, based on expectations, I think they exceeded them. They were actually one of the 3 teams that our preseason forecast correctly called their win-loss record for the whole season. So they won and lost just exactly what we forecast they would, although admittedly it took a pretty phenomenal upset in the final round to get that second win. And they saw a slight improvement in their RPI ranking over the season. So I just thought that they slightly exceeded our expectations. I gave them a B.
Someone giving them an A actually, I guess we should probably start with the Bulls giving them a B there. You're 2 grades higher than the rest of us. We all thought they were, and is that part of the what we were talking about earlier, the emotional attachment to the name that's impacted us, you think?
Well, it may be for you guys, but I mean, for us, it was really a case of the Bulls, the nature of their squad, and this probably plays into what you're saying about, we think of the Bulls of the late 2000s and that Bulls team that was half the Springboks team, but now they're very much on a case of a rebuild. They've got a very young, inexperienced group, so they pretty well performed to capacity this season. So there was no huge surprises in that for the Bulls for us. It's just a case of, again, it's a case of making sure they stick to their guns and give them a bit of time.
And that's something that we don't see so much down south, because obviously losing players to Europe happens a lot. Whereas it's something you can see something more. I sort of get an appreciation for more in the Aviva Premiership, where where sides do grow over a number of seasons. You look at people like Exeter Chiefs and Saracens, for example. But let's move on to Africa 2. This is the Lions, the Sharks, the Jaguares, and the Kings. And here you go, everyone. It's going to slide up on YouTube. So the Lions, pretty much across the board, all of us thought they did pretty well. I gave them an A. Mike gave them a B, and Rugby Numbers gave them an A, and did Gainline Analytics. Clearly, making a final was a good season for them. Losing Ron Ackerman is going to hurt them, as also some players. But overall, I think a very good season for them. Any kind of highlights anyone wants to pull out?
Well, I think the Kings were spectacularly good compared to expectations this season. There were a couple of teams across the competition who were facing the cup at the end of the season, and some of them responded by really lifting their game, and some of them responded by just giving up, it seemed. But the Kings, I mean, I think the best they've managed in the past was perhaps 16th or 17th on the table, and this year they came in 11th, which was ahead of the Waratahs, who are champions from a few years ago. And they just, in every measure that we have at Rugby Numbers, exceeded them. They won more matches than we thought they would. They finished much higher on the table than they did, and they showed the biggest improvement of any team in our Rugby Power Index rankings. On a scale of 1 to 100, they increased their ranking by 22 points. So I thought that was just an A effort. What else could you give them?
Well, I thought they improved a lot over the season, and as you say, one of those teams where as soon as there was talk about them getting cut, they got galvanised and brought the team together, which is interesting. And as Mike, you must be well impressed with them because you only gave one team an A, so this is as high a ranking as you gave everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, they were the supreme example of like what Rugby Numbers just said. Like facing the cut and choosing to come together as a group, and that showed in the way they played their games, and the result was just as one thing, but it's the way that you win, and they were actually quite close to getting an A for me as well.
And they talk about the different side to it, which is Jaguares, where most of us have ranked them down. I've given them a C because I thought they started the season well and then ran out of steam very quickly after about the fourth. I think it was like the first one for the first 5 games, and then really struggled at home, losing to the Force and losing to the Brumbies. Now, Simon, you've given them a B for a team that's supposed to be the Argentinian national side, who should be playing together a lot. Surely they should be performing more than this. If they should have all the connections between the players already.
Yes. Now, logic would dictate that, but the nature of the way they put their squad together and the nature of the way they use their squad over the course of the season does not help them, and that's why I marked them down. I gave them a B. So, and this is, unfortunately for them, this is part of the parcel of coming out of South America and the amount of churn that they have in their squad. And it doesn't necessarily allow the on-field cohesion over the course of the season to develop as much as the other teams. And so having those guys come in and that rotation over the course of the season works against them. Also, yes, I mean, a lot of these guys have played together in the Pumas, but the other thing to remember is that before the Jaguars, they were the diaspora of Argentinian rugby around the world, and that also they still haven't got over that as well. And so that's a factor that hasn't allowed them yet to really gel on the field.
Paul, I'd just like to call out a couple of Twitter comments that have come in while we've been talking. Hugh Rothwell just basically sums up our grades on this slide. He says, Lions great, Sharks okay, Jags inconsistent but entertaining, Kings big improvers and exciting to watch on their day. I think that pretty much summarises it. And NZ Rugby Quizzes also says, they said that the Jaguares are a success story, which I'd like to see. Something to back that up. Lions excellent, but helped by no New Zealand trip this year, and that this conference was the better of the 2 conferences. So I think we all agree that this was probably the stronger conference with the better performing teams of the 2 African ones. I'm not entirely sure I agree that the Jaguares were a success story this season. And Lions certainly excellent, and I don't know if we want to rehash the argument about whether they should have faced any New Zealand teams or not.
The Kings for us is a classic example. I mean, as the tweet said, that the Kings are great on their day, and that's a really good example of what we call a low cohesion team. That they're very, very volatile. One day they can absolutely turn it on, but another day they can be horrendous. And for the Kings this year, they had a few more days where they managed to turn it on than those horrendous days. So, but when you do have a sort of a low cohesion team like that, it's just not sustainable over the long term.
But I think we saw them they had a lot of turnover at the end of last season. It looks like they've lost a lot of players at the end of this season as well, which is going to impact them on in the Pro 14. I think there's talk about them being lent players from a lot of other sides, which means they're going to have a hard time carrying this through. But looking at the point of view, and the Kings finished above the Cheetahs from memory. Sorry, I should have the table in front of me, which would have put them second in the other conference. To me, that has got to be a sign of success, that they would have come second in the Africa 1 conference compared to this conference. And that's to me, that would be a big step up. The one we've not really talked about much, and I'm just going to quickly brush it, is the Sharks, because they pretty much were in agreement here that they, with the BCBB, is that they pretty much hit their potential. Now, if they'd managed to upset the Lions, then perhaps they'd have got an upgrade. But otherwise, they just sort of got that. They were just par for the season. Hence the B. I don't think there's anything else around them really much to say there.
No, I'd agree with that. Pretty much the perfect example of a team that performed exactly as expected. I think they win-loss record was exactly what we forecast it to be, and we also had them making the quarterfinals but not proceeding any further. That's, again, exactly what happened. And so I don't see how they can be anything other than just sort of a B for average, right? No better, no worse.
Exactly. And I think the conference is going to cause a lot of the discussion or a lot of surprise around some of the grades here is going to be the Australian conference. And so hence, let's move on to that one there. For those on the podcast, let me just quickly read these out because we'll be going through these. Obviously, this is the Brumbies, Force, Waratahs, Reds and Rebels. And you're going to get a theme first up. I thought the Brumbies were an A. Mike went C. Rugby Numbers went C. Galen Analytics went B for the Brumbies. And I'll just run through the letters in order. Force was A, C, A, A. Waratahs, C, D, D, B. Reds, D, D, B, B. And then Rebels, C, D, D, B. One of the things you'll notice there is that every single one of those, the last letter is one of the highest, which shows that I think there's going to be a analytical piece here that's going to differ from our emotional response to this. Let's kick off with the Brumbies. I mean, this is one, Will, that you wanted me to explain. So the reason I've given them an A is I thought the Brumbies came into this season having lost a lot of experience. So they lost Pocock, they lost Stephen Moore, they had Christian Leofano out with his leukemia, and also I think Matt Tuamua is an ex-Brumby, isn't he, as well? So they lost a lot of experience from this side, and to me this is supposed to be a rebuilding season for them. And so to top their conference in a rebuilding season, I thought was an A effort. I had them finishing either third or fourth as my expectations.
Yeah, I mean, they won their conference, but not very convincingly. The Waratahs sort of lost it, really, is what I think happened there. I mean, the Brumbies sort of received a little bit of criticism, mainly from New Zealand fans for supposedly taking the Highlanders' place in the quarterfinals because of the way the conference system works, being the Australian conference winner, even though they had fewer table points. So I thought they deserved to be in the quarterfinals. They won their conference. That's all you have to do. But I don't think they did it very convincingly. And I think that they were enormously helped by the sort of inexplicable implosion of the Waratahs this season.
So,
sorry, Paul.
No, go for it.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I don't think, the Australian conference in itself and the amount of points that they scored compared to the other in that whole Australasian conference, it sort of showed the standard of where the Australian teams were. But from the Brumbies' perspective, they pretty well tracked where we expected, except they just didn't do themselves any favours in how they use their squad over the course of the season, which is why I've sort of knocked a mark off them. So, but just particularly the way they play their game, they've always had this very good defensive record, but that doesn't necessarily put them in a good position around scoring either. So, but overall, I mean, the Brumbies, they made that semi-final position, but really, when you look at the points tables, I mean, their performance was a long way behind the Highlanders.
Yes, it was. I think it was the Blues that they really knocked out. I mean, the Blues got a couple of points ahead of them, I think, in the table, which I think would upset a lot of people. And I guess I should have wearing a Blues jersey. I should be one of those. But no, I personally think if you know the rules of the tournament before you go in, so that's not a big thing for me.
Yeah, sorry. Obviously, you're right. I meant the Blues, not the Highlanders. Just wanted to jump in with a comment that's too good to leave out, which was in response to the question of how have the Jaguares been a success this season. Mr. Rugby World Cup's pointed out that they topped the Argentine conference,
and they will do next year as well. They
nice.
But not in future, because let's be honest, we're going to expand into Argentina. There's going to be two teams there sooner or later, or for all the contraction that's going to happen this season. Next up, the Force got an A from three of us. So, Mike, what were you expecting from the Force that for this season, or was this just a gut feel?
Oh, mate, Jesus, I have no answer for you. Like, compared to these guys, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Look, I mean, yeah. I'm way out of my depth.
Not at all. This is all about opinions. These are things. And for me, with the Force, they've been towards the bottom of the table. I didn't expect them to come anywhere near the top. I think they've pulled together well. They've also had injuries during the season and pulled in quite a few club players, and so not even had their first choice lineup, and to come second in the conference under a cloud of them potentially all losing their jobs as well has shown great character from them personally, which is where they got my grade from.
Yeah, totally agree, Paul. I gave them an A for pretty much the same reasons. From the numbers point of view, they exceeded our expectations. But you just have to look at what was going on off the field, you know. You compare them with the way the Rebels responded to the same sort of threat. And the Force launched a massive campaign. They were all over social media. They secured some big names, sort of Australian names to back them. I think I saw one of their state MPs came out in support of them. Don't really follow Australian politics. I know there's an awful lot of politicians. It was one of them that came out behind them. And you could see that there's just a sort of really sort of positive so I don't want to be too patronising, but Aussie battler kind of thing that went on with the Western Force side, which you didn't see in the Rebels, for example. And it showed on the field. They had a great season.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things you mentioned was that you felt the Waratahs lost this conference rather than the Brumbies winning it. Personally, I thought the Reds. I had the Waratahs and Reds fighting it out at the top. Was how I saw this conference going to be. Hence the low rankings for those two. So from a rugby numbers point of view, so let's do the Waratahs first. Simon, we've all gone CDD because they're the champions from 3 years ago now, is it? I think it is. And they have obviously a big they are one of the big reputation, one of the successful Australian franchises. They've got Flow, they've got a whole bunch of Wallabies in there. How come that you think they've actually hit or been a par performance this year?
The reason being, so basically where they rank from our metrics in that Australasian pool, they're pretty well set around halfway in it. But the problem the Waratahs have at the moment is that the structure of the system that brings the players into the Waratahs is not allowing what gave the Waratahs the Super Rugby title in 2014. So things have changed a lot for them, and it's not allowing them to bring the players together in the same fashion as what they did 3 years ago. So they, to an extent, are performing to capacity based on at the moment. So that's why I wasn't necessarily as harsh as you guys with them, because they don't necessarily have a choice. The players on the field or the coach don't necessarily have a lot of control over how they can perform, just by the nature of the way the players come into the system.
And that's because they're coming the shoot shield system.
Through the NRC.
Oh, through the NRC. Okay. Yeah, and obviously well, not obviously. For those that don't know, I mean, if you look at over in Perth, you have one NRC team to a Super Rugby team, the same in Melbourne and down in Canberra. I think there's two up in Brisbane, isn't it, where the Reds are, and then there's 3 or 4 in Sydney, which makes it a bit of a different. And also, you don't have the same coaches coaching it. I mean, Styles, for example, did Brisbane City as head coach before he took over as head coach of the Reds, and so there's a bit more continuity between those sides than there is down in Sydney.
There is. And so New South Wales originally, when the NRC started, had 4, but now they're back to 3. And so teams like the Force, and this is one of the things that helped the Force this year as well, was the fact that they're using their NRC much better than they have been in the past. In previous seasons, they're actually using it as more of a development for the development players as opposed to their Super Rugby players. So, but now they're using it a little bit better in that regard, and that's helping them along the way. And that was why the Rebels had a bit of a standout season last year, is that the way they were using their NRC team, that they didn't have the opportunity, just in the nature of the way they signed players for this season. They didn't have an opportunity to use them in the NRC, and then a few guys got injured in the NRC, and so they didn't have that flow through, and that was one of the reasons that the Rebels probably performed just below par or below expectation for us this season.
Okay, yeah, and I did an interview with Zach, I've gone blank to his surname, who was the forwards coach at the Rebels a couple of years ago, and he talked about how the fact that the playing in the NRC had given the players a lot more freedom, and they could express themselves and try things, whereas at Super Rugby level, they just they don't feel they can try things as much, and so hence they don't develop their skills in the same way. And I guess that's part of, if you've not got that opportunity to try things for 8 or 10 weeks, whatever it is, then you can't carry that through.
Yep.
So then the Reds, obviously from an emotional point of view, myself and Mike have both given them a D. To me, they had the best side on paper in Australia with their signings. But from an analytical point of view, guys, you're both 2 grades up.
Yeah, so the Reds, I mean, I didn't really buy into the preseason hype, to be honest. It's not soccer, right? You can't put a bunch of individuals on the field and just expect them to somehow become a high-performing team. I think I remember discussing on Twitter with someone who hadn't realised just how few matches they'd actually won about halfway through the season. Sort of the hype continued for the first few rounds, even though they weren't actually performing particularly well. And that was pretty much how our forecast went for the Reds. At the beginning of the season, we just expected more of the same, which is basically what they delivered. So I don't think they were particularly awful, but I think our expectations were just a little bit lower.
We're talking about people like George Smith with 100 or nearly 100 Wallabies caps, and Stephen Moore coming back home as the Wallabies captain. I mean, we're talking big name players here who should be able to, they've got experience, who should be able to sort of just step in and pick up their game, surely. No, so is it that like a cohesion, Simon, that you saw there, that because they are just been signed in as big name players?
Definitely. So, I mean, one thing people talk about Stephen Moore coming home or Scott Higginbotham coming back to the Reds. That's all very well, but Stephen Moore's coming back to a team that he virtually hasn't played with any of the guys on the team, and likewise with Scott Higginbotham. So, and even if George Smith has all the skills in the world, it still takes that time to create those relationships, and so for people to understand how he plays. And still, at the breakdown, George Smith is great, but around the park, understanding how other people work in the defensive line. Like, that's the really important thing. And you just have to look at the points against record for the Reds this year was pretty poor, and that's an indication of, for us, that's an indication of how they were working together.
And a couple of comments on the YouTube was Queensland was Dad's Army, and which I think is a tad harsh maybe on there.
It is harsh. So when the All Blacks won the World Cup in 2011, I think it was statistically the oldest team ever to win. But it comes back down to purity of experience. If guys are old but they've played a lot together, then it doesn't matter. If guys are really young and they've played a lot together, it doesn't matter. And that's the key. So the Sharks a few years ago had a really young group, but they were performing. So it comes back down to it's that experience together that's the key.
And if we're going to go for World Cups size, in 2003, obviously with England was another one of those which was referred to as a Dad's Army. And went through and won it again. A team that had built up over a couple of World Cups, or at least one World Cup before, and had grown together. So I think we've run through all the teams here. So Brumbies transition, but won it. Force used their NRC well, and therefore managed to perform ahead of what we'd normally expect. The Tars and Reds in a situation where actually, whilst they've got the names and the highlights not put together or not working together much, and therefore struggling. And then finally, the Rebels, who signed a bunch of players and couldn't bring them through the normal system, and therefore performed poorly as well, is kind of the story, I think, around the Australian side. So moving on now to the one that we perhaps a lot of us know the best, because we are based, or three of us are based in New Zealand, is the New Zealand Conference. And as you can imagine, having got four of the teams into the finals, generally the grades are at the higher level. So for those listening on the podcast, the Crusaders got straight A's, being champions, unsurprisingly. The Hurricanes got an A, B, B, A. The Chiefs got an A, C, B, A. Highlanders, B, D, B, A. And then the Blues, B, D, D, A at the bottom of there. Kicking us off at the top, the Crusaders obviously won the whole thing, and therefore they've been given an A. How many of you, did everyone not see them making the final then beforehand? Because or was making the final perhaps a par performance for them?
So our forecast had the Lions and the Hurricanes as the most likely finalists. We had expected the Crusaders to get knocked out during the playoffs, probably by the Hurricanes. So they exceeded our expectations in that they made the final. And even going into the final, we had the Lions as favourites to win that. I would point out that it didn't factor in, our prediction didn't factor in the Lions playing with 14 men for half the match, but that happens, and if you want to win a final, then you don't make a tackle like Quagga did. But we gave the Crusaders an A. Even if they hadn't won, they outperformed what we thought they would do this season. And even if they hadn't, it's hard not to give an A to the champions, right?
Mike, you're one of the few that called it early on. Personally, I thought the Crusaders, with a change of management, would be sat in third or fourth place. But you quite early on said that you thought they were going to go well. Yeah,
well, back in January, it was just a hunch more than anything else, because it's been a while since they've had a title, and we all know the history of the Crusaders. But pretty early on in the comp, they just looked like a different team. And they've just been so clinical, like I've said on the show, inside that red zone. They get into the 22, they score tries, and they don't just come away with penalties. And yes, a lot of teams do that, but Crusaders defensively as well just second to none. And I think the culture, because let's not forget, we're only a couple of years out from DC leaving, from McCall leaving. But, the culture that Scott Robertson has brought in and the way he's sort of mentored those young players like, Richard Mwanga, who had a great impact on in EPC,
Simon, you probably had the stats behind this, but I remember seeing a tweet from the Auckland Rugby saying that they had a player playing in every single Super Rugby team one weekend. So the connection between Canterbury and the Crusaders, or well, at least Auckland and the Blues, isn't kind of there. Is there more of that connection there through the Canterbury and Crusaders, and so there wasn't such an impact from the coaching change?
Yes, well, that's right. That's a great thing about the Crusaders, and the fact that they brought through a Cantabrian into their head coach position is just an example of the way they do things in Canterbury. And half the issue them, it's not necessarily an issue. Half the thing there is that they don't have a choice about the way they do it. They don't necessarily have a massive player pool. It's almost that the way that the Crusaders has become is a function of the environment that they're in. Important for them to understand about what's actually brought them success and the way they bring it through. And in fact, it's almost like the Crusaders are opposite to the Blues in that. But just with the Crusaders, the really interesting thing about them is that because they've managed to give the bulk of the All Blacks over the last umpteen years, the Crusaders' winning percentage at the beginning of Super Rugby seasons has actually been very, very poor. But by the end of the season, they've absolutely been flying. But what's happened over the last 5, 6, 7 years is they just haven't been able to get that home final or that really good run at the end of the season. But because they jagged those wins at the beginning of the season, even though they still did have the All Black hangover, as we call it, that put them in this really positive position. And to go to South Africa and to win in South Africa is pretty amazing. There were other circumstances behind it, and potentially with 15 men, it could have been a different result for the Lions. As you can see, they turned it around in the second half. But that's just the nature of what the Crusaders is about, that they can handle that pressure in the nature of the team. They can travel overseas. So when they when they lost in 2011, the year that they played every game away from home because their stadium was wrecked, and they played a semi-final in South Africa and won that, and then came back to Australia and then lost the final by a point. And that is just indicative of the nature of what makes up the Crusaders, and that's part of the nature of the way they bring their players through and the way their programs work.
Yeah, guys like Matt Todd and Ryan Coddy really stand out. How many years have they served under Robinson and co, and in the provincial championship, and they've just been leaders. Where, up until recently, probably had to play second fiddle to some of the more senior Crusaders, but this year in particular, they really stood up and led the team. I think more than really Whitelock and Reid did. Whitelock's a great captain, but yeah.
That's totally agree, and the fact that the Crusaders can have, I think they had 3 first fives leave while Carter was still there that were of Super Rugby standards. Just says something about the way they can bring their players through, and that they have that ability to keep them, and that's the important thing, like you said, about those players that have done their time.
Yeah, and Todd and Crottier too, that you're kind of surprised haven't taken the European pound or euro at some point, and are still fighting it out. And now they're getting their turn. Well, at least Crottier's getting his turn in the All Blacks jersey. So on the Hurricanes, I thought personally they also did well. Yet fine, they are the reigning champions, but
not anymore.
They were the reigning champions going into this. Now, Will, I know part of it is that they didn't defend it, and you're from Wellington. Were you purely analytical on this one, or did you let some emotion get in this one?
Look, my model is unbiased, but I'm certainly not. I was frustrated with them. I thought they certainly had they certainly had a chance at making the final and winning the final. A very strong team, and I just thought that even putting aside my own biases, they probably should have got further in the competition. And I just thought they, if I go back to what I said before, they were the second most likely team to make the final according to our preseason forecast. And so I guess it's just a combination of the fact that they didn't, which meant my forecast was wrong, and also as a fan I was disappointed they didn't make it. I had to give them a B.
All right, well, I mean, they dropped a couple of crucial games that, you could argue that they were in positions to win as well. And I think that semi-final is probably the best example of that, in a position to win it. And, really should have won it, to be honest. And we could talk until the cows come home about how great the Lions were and how they came back in that match. But because the Hurricanes were really, in a lot of ways, the victims of their own demise in that semi-final in particular.
With the Hurricanes, if you just look at their record over the season, they actually had the best points for record, the best points against record. They had the second least tries scored against them. So on paper, they performed as good, if better than anybody else, but just the nature of the competition meant that they didn't get to the final.
I think the games against the Chiefs that they dropped, the ones they should have won, particularly the one at Westpac Stadium. And I mean, yes, they did the Crusaders in the last round robin game, but they were odds on to maybe beat them in the game in Christchurch as well. They just didn't perform on the night.
I guess, and seeing those stats there, but the Crusaders getting the wins, but not having the most points for, or having the best records for and against, shows how tight a lot of those Crusaders games were, and that came down to key moments. Obviously, the one that sticks out in my mind is Hunt's drop goal from a long way out to win the game against, I think it was the Highlanders, wasn't it? So there are. I guess, that goes to show how narrow some of these margins are around win and loss.
That was a truly outrageous moment. Just the audacity to even attempt to drop goal at that point of the match from that far out was pretty amazing. Just wanted to call out a couple of Twitter comments, Paul. Rugby Twit has made the comment that surely only the Crusaders have a pass mark. The others would have seen the title as a measure of success. So that's probably true for 4 of the 5 New Zealand teams. Perhaps the Blues would have seen making the playoffs as a measure of success. I'm not sure quite how high they set their sights this season. And I also just wanted to jump in on a argument that's been going on since the first question between Rugby Twit and Mercury, and suggest that maybe it's just time to move on and talk about the New Zealand conference, because I think you guys have sort of lost track of what's happening here.
Well, Super Rugby is not just about the New Zealand teams, though. We need to. Whatever.
Yeah, no, I've got a funny feeling. I'm not following it totally closely, but I think there's a lot of comments around whether the Lions play on New Zealand teams or not is what was referred to. Yeah, we should move on from that. So that's the top 2. Onto the Chiefs now. I thought personally the Chiefs did well. They had a lot of injuries. If you're playing a Beaver as at number 12 for a lot of the season, that's not the best sort of inside centre. He's going to get run through occasionally. So I thought they coped well with the injuries. Then had to travel across to South Africa and then back to New Zealand in the finals. That amount of travel means you've got to be odds on to lose. So to me, I thought they had a good season overall. Mike, you're in obviously in Hamilton. You get to all their games, but you is that obviously that's going to be an emotional C. Is that because you want to see them see the final again, or do you think actually the performances also haven't been up to scratch this season?
Well, the thing is, I think they've dealt with the injuries and better than they did last season, because last season was a shambles in that regard. And but again, there wasn't the leadership on the field in crucial moments this season, and I never saw them going any further than the semi-final. Don't know why. Maybe I'm a critic, but there was so much talk during the season about everyone who was leaving, and it just, I think, can't really put it more than that. They just, something wasn't quite right in the squad this year.
So culturally, the message just got was off key on this one.
Yeah, and I think their culture took quite a hit with what happened at the end of last season, and that was in the forefront of their minds. I think if you read between the lines this year, but too much was made about everyone who was leaving, and
Which, when you got Hugh Rothwell saying on Twitter, "Yep, end of an era for the Chiefs," and it has been, but it's been. Whereas you can see the Lions in some ways maybe up their game because Ackerman was leaving. In contrast, we're not sort of seeing that from the Chiefs with a whole bunch of guys leaving. But Simon, you still give them an A again. They've overperformed compared to what you expect.
Well, they matched expectations. So both the Chief and the Highlanders sort of really played to played to the capacity that we expected them to compared to the rest of the competition.
Right, and it's when it gets finals time, I'll agree that whether they could have picked up some more during the season. So that's where those ones are. Moving on to the Highlanders, champions obviously from 2 years ago. I've given them a B because obviously I think they'd be wanting to get further than the first round or the quarterfinals of the finals. Mike, you've gone down with a D. You obviously expect them to get there's only 4 teams can make the semi-finals, but I guess you think that their expectations are more to hit that semi-final stage.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're a much better side than what they put out on the field this year. And yes, they're a team that probably relies on their All Blacks players a bit more than other teams. But I think the start of the season for them really hurt. And yes, there are factors at play. It's a bloody tough conference in New Zealand one, and if you drop a couple of games early, then you're playing catch up for the rest of the season. So probably a bit tough giving them a D, but I thought guys like Sokoanga probably didn't have the what they needed this season. Fikatoa, another one. Yes, there were injuries, but yeah.
So Simon, a lot of us talk about the Highlanders and say they're reliant on their All Blacks. So Aaron Smith, Sokoanga, Fikatoa, Naholo, and Ben Smith in particular. Is that how you see it from an analytical point of view as well?
No. So Highlanders are a really interesting team. So I don't know if people remember. So after 2012, they brought in Brad Thorne, Ma Nonu, Tony Woodcock, somebody else, can't remember. Anyway, so current All Blacks. I remember there's quotes in the Otago Times from the captain, McIntosh, Jamie, terrible haircut, I remember, saying that...
you get all the key facts here on Hash Rugby Chat.
Yeah. Oh, look, the start of the Super Rugby season, it's like the highlight is let's see the bad haircuts coming out of the New Zealand teams this year. But it was really about that. At the time, they said, "All right, we've got these stars on board. We're going to take the next step. So we're going to step up. So we've got these All Blacks, we've got these new blokes." And they basically in 2013 they won 3 games after getting all these blokes on board. So then after that season, got rid of them, and they went really back to their core feeders in there. And I remember seeing in 2015, in fact, I was on the sideline coding coding a game for the Melbourne Rebels in a trial, and I honestly looked at the Highlanders and said, I have no clue who any of these blokes are, because of the way the nature of the way they drew the players, and that so it's not. So what I'm trying to say is it's not just the All Blacks in there, even though they're obviously very, very good players, but just the nature of the way they put that team together is allowed to probably perform above the level that you would expect with the skill of the individuals. And so that's the really strong thing about the Highlanders, in the fact that the way they went back to essentially grassroots, or back to their core feeders to bring their team through.
But they've still got, Fekitoa and the Holo both were at the Blues previously, so they've got those guys from up north. Fekitoa's back playing for Auckland in the Mitre 10 Cup this season. So it's not like they're built just from Southland and carrying it through in the same way that we see.
That's very true, but they've been there. This is the thing, they've been there for a while, and that's the key. It's not necessarily a case of the fact that you are from Southland or around that area. It's basically that time together, which makes the conversation about the Blues, when we talk about the Blues, around the nature of what they do, even more interesting, considering what you said before about how many Blues players are playing in the other conferences.
And Will, any final points on, if anyone else a shot at the Highlanders? Do you want to have a go?
No, I think the Highlanders basically went pretty much as expected this season. I didn't. I expected they would make the playoffs, but I didn't think they'd make the final, and that's what happened. So, no pearls of wisdom from me on that one.
One final point is I think that for me the reliance on the All Blacks piece comes from 2 years ago, where in World Cup year the games they seemed to lose were the ones where they had to rest their All Blacks, and then they went on to win the title. So that's why I thought they were overly reliant on their All Blacks, and I think they've lost. I think over the last couple of years that reliance has dropped off some, but I think back in 2015. For me, that was they seemed to lose whenever they rested the two Smiths and Sopawanga, but I think that's changed now with players like Buckman, Fadders, who have been around a few more years now, carry the team, and Marty Banks has been down there for a while as well. The team more, and perhaps that's not true, but that's my kind of feeling from it. The final team, the Blues. Well, my team, I've given them a B. Mike and Rugby Numbers have both given them a D, which now for me, I gave them a B on the grounds that for me an A would have been beating a New Zealand side, or making the finals. To me, losing every single game to a New Zealand team is poor and nearly dropped them to a C for me. I think that perhaps their performance should have had at least one victory against the New Zealand side, but they did beat the British and Irish Lions. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to count that in here or not, because that's not a Super Rugby game. But that's why I gave them a B. Starting first off, Will, with yours on the D. Everyone seems to think that they've stepped up from last season. Are you saying results-wise you don't think they have done?
Well, I originally gave them a C because I thought that they had done slightly worse than expected. I guess I had expected them to be considerably better than last season if they're supposedly rebuilding, but I didn't really see enough consistency from them to convince me that they actually had made a substantive gain. So I gave them a C, and then I remember that they were the losers of the biggest upset of the entire season. That match against the Sunwolves, not only was it the I wrote about this on my blog, not only was it the least probable win of the season, but it was also the largest winning margin by a team that wasn't expected to win. It was just unlike any other match this season. And sure, you can throw it away and say, well, they had nothing to play for. They weren't going to make the playoffs. It was 40 degrees hot, all this kind of stuff. But good teams don't give up. Good teams win, even if the game doesn't matter. And I just thought there's something missing that I think went missing during JK's coaching tenure and hasn't come back under Tana, which is just that mental edge. It just doesn't seem to be there. I don't see a lot of, I don't want to be too critical, but I don't see players stepping up. There's a lot of looking around, waiting for someone else to do something. You see quite a few occasions when a high ball just comes down in the middle of a group of 3 players. And I just think that's the kind of stuff that needs to be weeded out. I just didn't see many encouraging signs for the Blues this season, not counting that Lions game, of course, because that wasn't part of Super Rugby.
That Sunwolves game, the Blues had lost that game before they even got on the field. I mean, some of the stuff that happened on that holiday hasn't even come out in the media yet. Looking forward to that happening. Listen, I mean, yeah, okay, it might contradict what I said about the Highlanders, but when you got, like, they've got the names in this team to do a lot better than what they've done for the last few seasons. I think there's some sort of culture issue within this team. On game day, I think they're committed and they're really, really good, but there's something happening during the week that Tana Umaga hasn't been able to fix. JK wasn't able to fix it. It's been going on for a long time. And boy, I can't see, I'd love to see how we can give this team an A, to be honest. Looking forward to that one.
So before we get to that, just very quickly, Jack on YouTube has corrected me. The Blues did draw with the Chiefs. They didn't lose every game against New Zealand sides, but they didn't win one either. Right, let's go on, Simon. Explain the A.
Okay, so the reason I go the A's there is because they matched expectation. So by our rankings, they were bottom of the New Zealand teams. So there's no surprise that they performed against the other New Zealand teams where they were. The fact that they lost against the Sunwolves, you talk about the Blues as a team losing against the Sunwolves, but you've got to be conscious about the amount of changes they made for that game. So it's like it's a classic example of when Ireland beat the All Blacks last year. The fact that the All Blacks made some changes in some specific positions which impacted the team, but everyone just assumes it is a team. It is the team that perform X, Y, Z all the time. And so you're going against the Sunwolves, but what was put on the field was not necessarily the Blues team that people expected. So that's one thing about it. But the other thing about the Blues is, and Paul, you made the comment very early on about the tweet about so many Auckland players playing in the other provinces, and that's the classic example. One of the reasons why the Crusaders are very good is exactly the same reason, in the fact that they don't necessarily have a lot of access to talent. They don't necessarily have a lot of resources, which is almost the opposite for the Blues. The Blues have the biggest access to talent of all the New Zealand provinces, which actually works in their disadvantage because they can actually pick and choose where it comes from. They've got so much, it has to go. So when they bring in people move off as well. So the interesting thing for the Blues is because they don't have these tight funnels that say that the All Blacks do, that the Crusaders do, it means they don't have what we measure, the cohesion in the team. And that's what our numbers say. And so we talk about these things like the players, they don't necessarily have heart and all those sort of things. And the example, the example we heard before about 3 players under the high ball, that is communication, and that comes back down to a team having cohesion in it to make those decisions. And that's the thing that the Blues don't have at the moment because of the way they are bringing their players in. It's that when you look at the classic All Blacks teams, probably the best All Black team of all time, the 87 All Blacks, were essentially Auckland, and Auckland was essentially made of 2 clubs out of Auckland. And that's the big difference at the moment, where the players are coming from and how they're being funneled in and how they're being. So all the skill in the world is not going to get you the results if you don't bring them together in the right way. And that's the issue with the Blues at the moment. It's not necessarily an issue with the coaches. It's not necessarily an issue with the players. It's just the way they've been brought together.
Down in Canterbury, they've got a pretty successful rugby academy that a lot of the famous Crusaders and future All Blacks have come out of. I think a lot of players actually don't want to play for the Blues, and that is, we need to ask why. Damien McKenzie was offered a very, very lucrative deal with the Blues, where he would have been, the man calling all the shots, essentially turned it down. I don't know. I just think sometimes it goes a bit beyond the actual. Yeah, I see your point, but
here's a question for all the Twitter followers out there: who did Dan Carter play? Who was he reserved to in the South Island Schools team? No, I'll put that out there. And this says something about the talent of what, say, something like the Crusaders can do, the nature of what the Crusaders is. Because Dan Carter, we know that he's Dan Carter, but he wasn't always Dan Carter. So he didn't make New Zealand Schools when he was. He actually played under somebody else in South Island Schools. So let's see if anyone can pick that one.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's perhaps not directly related, but it just reminds me of a great quote I remember from Aaron Cruden when he first came onto the international scene, and he was just asked, you've been called the next Dan Carter. How does it feel to be called the next Dan Carter? And he just said, "Well, I'm not the next Dan Carter. I'm the first Aaron Cruden," which sort of sums it up. And I think that's perhaps not an original quote. I think it's been used. I'm trying to remember now. It was either an NFL or an NBA player who made the same comment. But there's no shortage of talent. Why do they need to try and replicate what's already out there? These strong players carve out these niches for themselves and make themselves distinctive in some way. Why is an All Blacks squad going to select two Dan Carters when you can have a Dan Carter and an Aaron Cruden?
Yeah, so they can change it up. So there was a question in the YouTube, which I think we'll finish off on, which from Decom20 said, "Can you ask the panel to rate Tanner in his first year as a super coach?" Well, it's not first year, it's second year. Personally, I think he's doing a decent job. I think it's moving forwards. Perhaps he needs, I think there's a core of county players there, but perhaps he needs to be not selecting from as wide a group who will try and get more of them into counties, if that's where he's going to have his base from rather than Auckland. But personally, I think he's doing okay as a super coach. And I think they should stick with him. From Mike's comments, I think we've had already some of the culture issue there. You think that he hasn't got hold of yet,
Tanner's a good coach, and yes, he should stay there. But he's hamstrung by some management issues that are going on further up than just the actual team and what we see on match day. And when that gets resolved, things will change. But
yeah,
I'm going to say what that is.
He got a bit of a hospital past, didn't he? Coaching the Blues, but I mean, the Blues haven't gone backwards underneath Tanner. He sort of arrested the slide in their performance that's been going on probably over the last 10 years, to be honest. So he's sort of managed to level things out, and you do see glimpses all through the season. You see glimpses of what the Blues team can be when they get it together. But yeah, like you say, perhaps it's off-field influences or something's going on, which just causes this frustrating inconsistency. And I think probably they'd be shooting themselves in the foot if they ditch Tanner. They need continuity. They need to build sort of a solid, I guess it's a bit of a title cliche, but they need to build a solid platform. They need to have consistent coaching staff and consistent players. And they've given enough glimpses to show that there is improvement to be had. I just can't see it happening overnight.
cool. And just wrapping it all up now, guys. Any final thoughts about the season you want to give us before we sign off?
Yeah, we've talked about Sanzar and the structure of the competition on the show, and something really needs to change and change fast. Further expansion is not the answer. I can see the benefits of it, but it's so confusing, the structure of this competition, and at least to the average guy who doesn't, nowhere near as intelligent as these other two here.
Well, not only is the conference system confusing, but it's unfair as well. And I mean, I can understand where Sansa are coming from. To have a sort of double round robin where every team plays every other team, you're looking at over 300 games. It's completely impractical. So you've got to do something to come up with a system that works for everybody, especially all the geographic distances that have to be covered. What they've come up with this season is, I'll call it suboptimal. It's pretty terrible. And I saw some suggestions for next year, which eliminate some of the rules around which teams from which pairs of conferences can qualify and so on. So simplify the whole thing down. And I'm hoping that that's the direction they head in. Merit-based positions in the playoffs.
Sorry, Paul, I was going to say, I mean, ultimately, you would expect the best team is going to win regardless. However, the way the system's set up, it does make it hard for people like ourselves to actually work out how teams are going to perform overall. So it does make it difficult, which in turn does make it difficult for the fans, and potentially that's one of some of the poor showing come the final time. That potentially the fans were probably a little over it by the end as well. So, but it is difficult. But unfortunately, it's the nature of the sport and the nature of the competition here.
Yeah, I think the negative press around this season, this whole season, and the structures has definitely led to drops attendances, drops viewerships as well. If you've got negativity around something, why do people make the effort to go see it? And so a lot of the negative press, both in the paid press and the amateur press or alternative press, whatever you want to call it, has definitely led to that. And so, yeah, it has been a sad season on that side of things. On the good side is we have ended up with the best two teams, or two of the best teams at the sharp end of the tournament. Whether you can argue whether the Hurricanes were better than the last two, but I mean they were there at the sharp end anyway. But thankfully we have ended up with that, as you say, which is good. And last season again we had the top teams ending up at the sharp end. So despite I think is what everyone has been saying, despite the format, we have ended up with a good game and an exciting one. Unfortunately, we've lost fans along the way. Two things I think. One is that structure, but also secondly is just the uncertainty and the lack of leadership we've seen, especially out of Australia going into next year, is a big problem for Super Rugby, and that does need to get itself sorted out. I understand Mike's issue about expansion. I think the reason that we've had this problem is expansion has been done badly, rather than expansion is necessarily a bad thing. And I think again also conference has been done badly rather than necessarily a bad thing. We've seen it work in the States. It can work, but it needs to be done structured better and also sold better through the media, in both an education of the fans is my view. And with that,
the last thing we want is something, and this will never happen, but like, can you imagine if Super Rugby was split, whereas, you know, one conference fights for that particular trophy and the other one fights for this, you know? I mean, where does it stop? I guess, you know?
Well, either you end up with a tier 1 conference in the Americas, or we're going to end up with Super Rugby or Pro 14 being a global tier 1 conference system. There's going to have to be some way of getting of growing the game. But I mean, in the States, they do play for the AFC versus the NFC to play for the NFL final. So there is that way of doing it. And I think if you're going to split South Africa and Australia, you need to make it a clean split, not a 3-4, not a 3-5 split, which has confused everybody. And that's where I think they went wrong with that one. Anyway, we are over time. Thank you very much for joining me. Mike, why don't you give a quick, let one know quickly where they can get hold of you and have a chat if they want to afterwards.
Cool, yeah. Might need an education on the stats because, boy, oh boy, got skilled tonight. You can follow me on Twitter at RealMikePullman, and also go to lastwordonrugby.com. We are one of the editors there. Got some good rugby championship coverage coming up very shortly.
Will, why don't you let people know where they can get hold of you?
Yeah, it's very straightforward. rugbynumbers.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at rugbynumbers. And in the next few days, I'll be putting out the inaugural Rugby Numbers season awards, where I'll be pulling out the teams with the best offense, the best defense, and a few other bits and pieces as well. So look out for that.
Thank you very much. And Thank you, Simon, for a special guest tonight from Gainline Analytics. Please do let people know where they can get hold of you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So our website's www.gainline.biz and Twitter @GL Analytics, and subscribe to our company publication, the Gainline Report, for all things sport and analytics.
And thank you very much for the insights you've given us tonight around the connectivity and all that kind of stuff. Thank you, everybody. I am Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul. Please remember to subscribe in your podcast so it gets onto your phone, or subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. We'll be back again next week having a preview of the Rugby Championship and also probably some Mitre 10 Cup chat as well. So please do join us for that, 8 p.m. New Zealand time next Tuesday.